In the heart of Beverly Hills, nestled among the opulent mansions of Hollywood royalty, lies a house shrouded in mystery and unease. This is the Bette Davis house, where the iconic actress spent her final years, leaving behind a legacy of brilliance and, some say, a lingering presence. After her passing in 1989, rumors began to swirl about the mansion. Visitors reported inexplicable cold drafts sweeping through rooms, even on the hottest California days. The chandelier in the grand foyer would sway as if touched by an unseen hand. Most unsettling were the faint echoes of laughter, Betty's unmistakable, throaty chuckle drifting through the halls at night. The new owners, a young couple enamored with the home's Hollywood history, dismissed the tales as fanciful. But their enthusiasm dimmed after their first week. On their second night, they awoke to the sound of a piano playing softly in the living room. The grand piano, which they had never played, sat silent when they investigated. Days later, the wife discovered a mirror in the upstairs hallway fogged with condensation, though the house had no leaks or drafts. Written across it, as if traced by a finger, were the words, "What a dump," a nod to Davis's famous line from Beyond the Forest. Neighbors claimed the house always seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. Some said Davis, ever the perfectionist, remained tethered to the home, unsatisfied with her portrayal in the afterlife. Others believed the haunting wasn't Betty at all, but an energy left behind by the house's tumultuous history. Indeed, the mansion had seen more than its share of drama. Before Davis, it belonged to a notorious silent film star whose scandalous parties often ended in tragedy. It's said that the echoes of those wild nights mingle with Davis's spectral presence, creating an uneasy cocktail of past and present. One paranormal investigator who visited the home described feeling an overwhelming sense of being watched. Using a spirit box, they claimed to have made contact with a voice that rasped, "Lights, camera, action," before the equipment fell silent. Whether Bette Davis herself haunts the house or it's merely the imaginings of those entranced by Hollywood lore, one thing is certain. The Bette Davis house remains an enigma, a place where the golden age of cinema refuses to fade away. The young couple tried to dismiss the strange occurrences. After all, the mansion was old, and old houses creaked and groaned. But the oddities grew harder to ignore. One night, as the husband worked late in the study, he caught the faint scent of cigarette smoke. It was rich, unmistakably vintage, like the scent of Davis's favorite brand. Yet no one in the house smoked, and the study's windows had been shut tight. His unease deepened when he found a single lipstick-stained cigarette, but in an ashtray that had been empty just moments before. The wife, meanwhile, began to experience vivid dreams of a glamorous woman pacing the house, muttering lines from films that felt eerily familiar. In the dreams, the woman's figure would stop in front of her and stare, her eyes piercing, as if willing the dreamer to remember something long forgotten. One evening, the couple decided to host a small dinner party, hoping the presence of friends would banish the eerie solitude of the house. Among the guests was a Hollywood historian who was eager to explore the mansion's fabled history. As they toured the house, the historian paused in the upstairs corridor, staring at the large, ornate mirror. This mirror, she whispered, her voice trembling, was said to have been a gift from Davis's close friend. It's where she would rehearse her lines and confront her fears. At that moment, the lights flickered, and the mirror seemed to ripple, as if it were not glass but water. The guests froze as a faint voice filled the room, sharp and commanding. "Who's watching me?" The room fell into a suffocating silence. The historian's face turned pale, and she quickly excused herself from the party, leaving the couple with more questions than answers. Later that night, unable to sleep, the wife wandered the halls with a flashlight. As she passed the mirror, she thought she caught a glimpse of movement. Heart pounding, she turned back. In the faint glow of the flashlight, she saw her own reflection, but behind her, barely visible, stood a shadowy figure in a gown, staring at her with eyes full of sadness. The figure raised a hand, pointing toward the attic door at the end of the hallway. The wife turned to look, but the attic door remained shut. When she looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. The next day, the couple decided to investigate the attic. They had avoided it until now, partly because it was cluttered with old trunks and partly because it seemed wrong. The air was heavier there, as though the space itself resisted intrusion. As they pulled down the creaky ladder and ascended into the dim attic, they were greeted by a strange stillness. Among the dusty relics of the past, a trunk filled with old scripts, a broken projector, and faded photographs, they found something that didn't belong. A pristine reel of film, untouched by time. The reel was labeled in red ink, "Final Performance." The husband hesitated, but his wife urged him to take it to the living room and play it on the old projector they discovered weeks ago. As the film began to roll, the screen filled with scenes of Bette Davis, but not ones anyone had seen before. It was as if the reel captured moments of her life off-screen. Rehearsing, laughing, crying. And then the footage changed. The glamorous Bette disappeared, replaced by distorted images of the house itself, its halls darker, its corners crawling with shadows. The film ended abruptly with a close-up of Davis's face, staring directly at the camera. Her lips moved, forming silent words, before the reel snapped, leaving the room in darkness. But the silence didn't last. From somewhere deep within the house came a slow, deliberate knock. Once, twice, the attic door creaked open on its own. The couple sat frozen in the darkened living room, the faint smell of old film lingering in the air. The knocking came again, 3 deliberate raps, echoing through the silent house. They exchanged uneasy glances. The husband grabbed a flashlight, his hand trembling. "Stay here," he whispered to his wife, though she was already shaking her head. "I'm not staying here alone," she insisted, clutching his arm. Together, they climbed the stairs, following the sound. The attic door, which they had shut tightly, now hung ajar. From inside came a faint rustling, as if someone or something was shifting through the forgotten relics. They stepped cautiously into the attic. The air was colder now, biting and sharp. The flashlight beam swept across the room, landing on the open trunk. The contents, scripts, photographs, and what looked like a collection of handwritten letters, were scattered across the floor. Among the debris, something caught the wife's eye. A small, leather-bound journal lying apart from the rest. She picked it up and opened it, her breath hitching as she read the first line written in elegant, looping handwriting. "To whomever finds this, the truth must be known." The entries were erratic, fragmented. They spoke of paranoia, of Davis feeling watched even in her own home. One line stood out, scrawled in jagged letters across an entire page. "They want my soul for the screen. They won't let me leave." "What does it mean?" the wife asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before her husband could respond, the attic door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The flashlight flickered, and for a moment, they were plunged into complete darkness. When the light steadied, they saw it. A shadow, impossibly tall and humanoid, standing in the corner of the attic. It didn't move, but the air around it seemed to pulse, heavy and oppressive. The wife gripped her husband's arm, her nails digging into his skin. "Who's there?" the husband called, his voice cracking. The shadow tilted its head, and for a moment, they thought it was going to step forward. Instead, it raised a hand and pointed not at them, but at the far wall of the attic. There, obscured by dust and cobwebs, was a small wooden door they hadn't noticed before. "We're leaving," the wife whispered, tugging at her husband's sleeve. But he was already moving toward the door, as if drawn by some unseen force. He reached for the handle only to find it locked. Frustrated, he yanked harder, and the door swung open with a groan. Beyond it was not another room, but a narrow staircase spiraling downward, deeper into the house than they thought possible. The steps were lined with faintly glowing marks, like fingerprints burned into the wood. "Where does this lead?" the wife asked, her voice trembling. "I don't think it's part of the house," the husband replied, his face pale. From below came a faint hum, a sound that seemed almost musical, but not quite. It was haunting, like a melody played backward. And then, over the hum, a voice whispered from the depths, "Lights, camera, action." The shadow at their backs began to move. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The voice echoed, lights, camera, action. The words curling like smoke and filling the air with an unnatural weight. The couple stood frozen, their breaths shallow as the shadow behind them crept closer. We have to go, the wife urged, her grip tightening on her husband's arm. But instead of retreating, he stepped forward, his eyes locked on the glowing staircase. It's calling us, he said, almost as if in a trance. No, it's a trap, she hissed, pulling him back, but his foot had already touched the first step. The moment his soul met the wood, the hum grew louder, vibrating through their bones. The marks along the stairs flared brighter, revealing strange symbols arcane, indecipherable etched into the wood. Each step seemed to pulse with energy, as if alive. They descended together, one reluctant, the other compelled. The staircase spiraled endlessly downward, far beyond what the house's dimensions should allow. The walls grew darker, the air heavier. Soon, the faint hum became a symphony of distorted sounds. Snippets of old Hollywood dialogue, fragments of applause, and faint sobbing. "Do you hear that?" the wife whispered. He nodded, his face pale. "It's her." The steps ended abruptly in a vast, dimly lit chamber. The space was cavernous, lined with towering shelves filled with film reels, scripts, and photographs. At the center stood an old, rusted director's chair with Betty Davis's name engraved on the back. Behind it loomed a massive, flickering screen. The screen came to life, displaying distorted images of Betty Davis moments from her films, but they were wrong. Her expressions shifted unnaturally, her movements jerky, as though the footage was being controlled by an unseen force. Then the screen went black, and a single word appeared in bold white letters. Record. The shadow had followed them into the chamber, its form shifting and undulating. It moved toward the chair, and as it approached, a voice, Betty's unmistakable voice, echoed from the void. "They promised immortality," the voice said, filled with bitterness. "But they didn't say what it would cost." The husband stepped closer to the chair, drawn by an unseen pull. His wife grabbed his arm, trying to stop him, but he shook her off, his eyes fixed on the chair as if entranced. "Don't!" she cried, her voice breaking, but it was too late. He sat down, and the shadow surged forward, enveloping him. The room exploded with light and sound, fragments of Betty's films and life flashing across the screen at an unbearable speed. The wife shielded her eyes, screaming his name, but her voice was drowned out by the cacophony. When the light dimmed, the chair was empty. The husband was gone. The screen flickered, and a new image appeared. A grainy black and white shot of the wife, standing alone in the chamber, her face twisted in fear. The shadow loomed behind her, its form now sharper, more human. The film's title burned onto the screen in blood-red letters. "Final performance, starring you." The wife turned to run, but the shadow was already reaching for her. The wife stumbled back, her heart pounding as the shadow stretched toward her. Its form writhed like smoke, but its edges sharpened, claws extending as it reached. She felt its cold presence brushing against her skin, a touch that wasn't physical but penetrated her very soul. "No!" she screamed, darting toward the staircase. But the stairs were gone. Behind her now stood only a blank wall, its surface rippling as though alive. The chamber began to change. The shelves of film reels flickered in and out of existence, replaced by rows of audience seats, empty yet filled with an overwhelming sense of expectation. A spotlight flared on, blinding her, and a voice boomed from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Places, everyone. The show must go on." The shadow halted, retreating to the edge of the light as if confined by it. In its place, a figure stepped forward, Betty Davis herself, or what was left of her. She looked both radiant and decayed, her features shifting between the striking actress of her prime and a spectral, hollow-eyed apparition. "They trapped me here," Betty said, her voice trembling with fury. "They used me, my talent, my soul. And now they want yours." The wife's knees buckled as she sank to the ground. "Why, what is this place?" Betty gestured to the massive screen, which flickered back to life. It showed scenes of the house, its rooms, its hallways but warped, as if caught in a dream. Figures moved through the footage, some recognizable as past owners, others unidentifiable. They wandered aimlessly, their faces vacant, their eyes hollow. "This house," Betty said, "is more than walls and wood. It's a vessel, a stage. They feed on the energy of those who live here, capturing their essence like film on a reel. It's how they keep themselves alive." "Who are they?" the wife whispered. Betty's gaze darkened. "The directors, the writers, the producers, not of this world. They came long before Hollywood, long before stories were told around campfires. They crave creativity, talent, passion. They crave life. And now they've written you into their script." The chamber trembled, the walls bending inward. The audience seats were no longer empty. Shadowy figures now filled them, faceless yet staring, their anticipation palpable. The spotlight shifted, centering on the wife, who found herself standing in the middle of a stage. "Perform," the voice demanded, louder now, shaking the very ground beneath her. "What do they want from me?" she cried, spinning to face Betty. "To entertain," Betty said with a sad smile. "To give them a story worth consuming. Or else," she gestured to the screen, where the husband now appeared, his image frozen mid-scream, trapped like a fly in amber. The wife's chest tightened. She had to think, to act, but how could she outsmart something ancient, something that thrived on the brilliance and agony of others? The shadowy audience leaned forward, their presence suffocating, as if eager for the climax. And then she saw it, the journal still clutched in her trembling hands. She flipped through the pages frantically, the scrawled words blurring together until one phrase leapt out, etched in jagged letters. "They write the story, but you control the ending. What does it mean?" she muttered, the spotlight growing hotter, the air heavier. From the corner of her eye, she saw Betty step back, fading into the darkness. "Figure it out," Betty said, her voice barely audible. "You don't have much time." The stage lights dimmed, and the audience began to rise. Their shadowy forms grew taller, more defined, their faceless heads tilting as they loomed closer. The screen flickered again, this time showing a countdown. 10, 9, 8. The wife gripped the journal tighter. If this was a story, could she rewrite it? Could she find a way to break free? The countdown blazed on the screen. 7, 6, 5. The wife's mind raced, her fingers trembling as she flipped through the journal. The audience, shadowy and silent, crept closer, their presence suffocating. The weight of their expectations bore down on her like an avalanche. And then, she saw it, an entry scrawled on the last page of the journal. "They thrive on control. Take it from them and their power collapses. Tell a story they can't predict." Her heart hammered as the words sunk in. If they were trapped in a narrative, she had to seize the reins. She glanced at the screen, its countdown blazing for 3. "No," she whispered, stepping forward. "This is my story now." The audience froze, their faceless heads cocking to one side. The shadowy figures hesitated, their movements jerky and uncertain, as though her defiance disrupted the script. "What are you doing?" the disembodied voice thundered. The stage quaked, and the spotlight flickered violently. The wife stood tall, gripping the journal tightly. "You feed on creativity, on passion, don't you? You want a performance? I'll give you one." She raised her voice, forcing it to steady. "Once upon a time, there was a house so greedy it devoured every soul who entered it. But one day, someone decided to starve it." The walls groaned, the audience shifting uneasily. This someone realized the house was nothing without its stories, without its victims. So she gave it nothing. No fear, no pain, no desperation. Just silence. The audience recoiled, shrinking back into their seats. The shadow that loomed over her shuddered, its form thinning, unraveling. The countdown stopped at 1, the number pulsing faintly, as if waiting. The wife took a deep breath. "You don't get to control me. I'm walking off your stage." She turned her back on the shadow, the screen, and the audience. With every step she took toward the far wall, the chamber trembled, the light dimming, the air lightening. The oppressive weight began to lift as the shadows shrank further, their whispers turning to desperate murmurs. "You can't leave," the voice roared, filled with panic. "The story isn't over." She reached the blank wall where the staircase had once been. As she placed her hand against it, the wood grew warm, then soft, then bright. The surface dissolved, revealing the narrow steps spiraling upward. "Goodbye," she whispered, stepping onto the staircase. The chamber behind her collapsed into darkness, the voices fading to silence. She climbed, the air growing lighter, warmer, until she burst through the attic door and back into the house. The house felt different now. The heavy atmosphere was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. The furniture sat undisturbed, the grand piano silent. She ran to the living room, hoping to find her husband. There, on the couch, he lay unconscious but breathing. She shook him gently, and his eyes fluttered open. Where am I?" he asked groggily. "You're home," she said, tears streaming down her face. "We're safe." As they embraced, the old projector in the corner whirred to life one last time. The screen lit up, displaying a single frame. The wife standing defiantly on the stage, the shadow shrinking behind her. Below it, in bold red letters, was the title, "The One Who Got Away." The screen flickered off, and the projector burned out with a faint hiss. The house was silent again, but this time, it felt at peace. Hand in hand, they walked out the front door, leaving the Betty Davis house and its haunted legacy behind. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Any coincidences with real events or characters are accidental.